My brother-in-law Gerard has spent the last 28 years believing I'm nothing more than a small-town accountant who got lucky marrying his sister. Last Tuesday, at his waterfront estate in West Vancouver, he looked me in the eye and told me I'd wasted my potential. What Gerard doesn't know is that I control the majority stake in the venture capital firm that's been quietly buying up distressed properties across British Columbia for the past 15 years, including the shopping complex his development company is about to lose. I met Rebecca in 1994 at a community theater production in Winnipeg. She was volunteering as a set designer, and I was there because my grandmother had dragged me along, insisting I needed to get out more after my grandfather's passing. Rebecca wore paint-splattered overalls and had this way of tilting her head when she listened that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked for 3 hours after the show ended, sitting on those uncomfortable folding chairs while the janitors swept around us. Her brother Gerard showed up that night to pick her up. He drove a brand new BMW, unusual for Winnipeg in those days, and barely acknowledged me beyond a dismissive nod. Rebecca told me later that Gerard had recently returned from Toronto, where he'd been working in commercial real estate. He'd made some successful deals and never let anyone forget it. "He's not always like that," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it herself. Rebecca and I were married 8 months later in a simple ceremony at her parents' home in Street Vital. Gerard was the best man, though he spent most of his speech talking about his own accomplishments and how he'd taken care of the family since their father had passed away when they were teenagers. He ended with a backhanded comment about how Rebecca was settling down with someone stable, which everyone politely ignored. What no one knew, what I hadn't told anyone, including Rebecca, was that my grandfather hadn't just left me his modest house in Osborne Village. He'd left me something far more valuable. A portfolio of early investments in Western Canadian tech startups and resource companies that he'd quietly accumulated over 40 years of careful financial planning. My grandfather had been a railway accountant, but he'd understood something fundamental about money that most people miss. It's not about how much you make, but what you do with what you have. When he passed, that portfolio was worth approximately $1.8 million. I was 26 years old. I didn't tell Rebecca about the inheritance, for a simple reason. I wanted to know she loved me for who I was, not what I had. I'd seen too many relationships in my family destroyed by money, by expectations, by the weight of wealth, changing how people treated each other. My grandmother understood. She was the only person who knew the full extent of what my grandfather had left me. "Use it wisely," she told me the day after the funeral. "Your grandfather didn't accumulate this to buy things. He accumulated it to buy freedom and opportunity for the people he loved." So, I became David Morrison, small-town accountant. I took a job at a modest firm in Winnipeg, handling bookkeeping for local businesses. Rebecca and I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in Wolseley, and she continued her work as a graphic designer. We lived comfortably but modestly. We drove used cars. We took camping trips to Lake Winnipeg instead of flying to exotic destinations. We were happy. What I did with my grandfather's money was invisible. I studied, I learned, I networked quietly. I took online courses in finance and venture capital. I read everything I could about emerging technologies and market trends. And slowly, carefully, I began to invest. Not under my own name, I created a numbered company, then later a small private investment firm called Clearwater Capital Partners. On paper, I was just an employee, a financial analyst. In reality, I owned it entirely. By the time Rebecca and I had been married 5 years, Clearwater's portfolio had grown to $4.2 million. By year 10, it was $12 million. I reinvested aggressively, focusing on undervalued real estate during market downturns and backing promising tech startups before they became household names. I had a gift for seeing potential where others saw risk. Rebecca knew I did some consulting work on the side. She knew I spent evenings working on investment projects. She just assumed it was small scale, helping friends with their finances, maybe managing a modest portfolio. I never corrected her assumption. It wasn't lying, I told myself. It was protection. Gerard, meanwhile, had moved to Vancouver in 1998 and launched Hartwell Development Group. He specialized in mid-range commercial properties and retail spaces, and he'd done well for himself. His company was successful enough that he could afford a sprawling home in West Vancouver with a view of the harbor. He married a woman named Patricia who came from old Vancouver money, which only amplified his sense of superiority. Every family gathering became a stage for Gerard to perform his success. He'd talk about his latest acquisition, his newest luxury car, the exclusive golf club he'd just joined. He'd ask me how the accounting business was going with this particular tone that suggested accounting was barely a step above janitorial work. "Still crunching numbers for those small businesses, David," he'd say, swirling his wine. "There's real money in development, you know. Maybe I could get you a position in our accounting department. Entry level, of course, but it might be a step up from what you're doing now." Rebecca would tense up beside me, her hand finding mine under the table. She'd try to change the subject or defend me, but I'd gently squeeze her hand and let it go. What Gerard thought of me didn't matter. What mattered was that Rebecca and I had built a life based on genuine partnership, not financial hierarchy. By 2015, Clearwater Capital Partners had quietly become one of the most successful private investment firms in Western Canada. Our portfolio had grown to $180 million. We'd backed 3 tech startups that had successful exits, invested in commercial real estate across 4 provinces, and held significant positions in several publicly traded companies. I'd built a small team of analysts and attorneys who handled the day-to-day operations, all under strict confidentiality agreements. I still went to work at my accounting firm every day. I still drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic. Rebecca and I still lived in the same modest house we'd bought in Charleswood in 2002. A comfortable 3-bedroom bungalow with a small backyard where we'd raised our daughter, Emma. Emma was born in 1999, and from the moment she arrived, every decision Rebecca and I made was filtered through a single question: how do we raise her with genuine values in a world that worships wealth? We didn't want her to grow up entitled. We didn't want her to measure her worth, or anyone else's, by their bank balance. So Emma grew up thinking her father was a humble accountant, and her mother was a freelance designer. She went to public school. She had a part-time job at a coffee shop when she turned 16. When she asked for a car for her 17th birthday, we bought her a used Toyota and told her she'd need to pay for her own insurance and gas. She learned the value of hard work, of saving, of appreciating what she had. Gerard, meanwhile, spoiled his 2 children relentlessly. His son Brendan had a sports car at 16 and flunked out of 2 universities before Gerard finally pulled strings to get him a position at Hartwell Development. His daughter Madison spent more on shoes than most families spent on groceries. Every Christmas, Gerard would make a show of his generosity, giving expensive gifts while making comments about how some of us can afford to splurge a little. He'd ruffle Emma's hair and say things like, "Maybe when you're older, Uncle Gerard can find you a real job, something better than serving coffee." Emma would smile politely, but I could see the steel in her eyes. She had her mother's grace and, though she didn't know it yet, her father's quiet determination. The secret I'd been keeping for nearly 3 decades almost revealed itself in 2018. Rebecca had been feeling overwhelmed with work and stressed about Emma's university tuition. We'd been putting money away in an RESP, but Emma had been accepted to UBC's engineering program, and the costs were substantial. "Maybe I should take on more clients," Rebecca said one evening, rubbing her temples. "Or we could look into getting a loan. I just don't want Emma to graduate with massive debt like we did." I'd almost told her then. Almost explained that Emma's entire university education was already paid for through a trust I'd set up years ago, that Rebecca never needed to worry about money again, that we could afford anything she wanted. But something stopped me. It was Gerard's voice in my head from a family dinner the month before. "The problem with you two is you're so focused on being authentic that you're willing to struggle unnecessarily. There's no virtue in being poor, David." I realized that if I told Rebecca about the money, everything would change. Not because she was materialistic, she wasn't, but because the dynamic of our relationship would shift. I'd become the provider, the one with the power, the one who'd been keeping secrets. And I didn't want that. I wanted us to remain equals, partners who'd built a life together through mutual effort and shared values. So I found another way. I arranged for Emma to receive a merit scholarship from a foundation I'd quietly funded through Clearwater. The paperwork looked entirely legitimate, because I'd simply created the scholarship program specifically to help students like Emma. Rebecca was thrilled and relieved. Emma was proud, and our life continued as before. But I'd been keeping this secret for so long that it had become almost burdensome. I'd built something extraordinary, and I couldn't share it with the person I loved most. Some nights, lying beside Rebecca, I'd wonder if I'd made the right choice. But then Gerard would make another dismissive comment about my little accounting practice, and I'd remember why I'd chosen this path. The turning point came 3 months ago. Emma graduated from UBC with honors and immediately landed a position at a prestigious engineering firm in Vancouver. Rebecca and I flew out for her graduation, staying at a modest hotel near campus. Gerard insisted on hosting a family celebration at his estate in West Vancouver. "It's the least I can do for my brilliant niece," he said, though his tone suggested he deserved more credit for her success than her actual parents did. The celebration was exactly what you'd expect from Gerard: excessive, showy, expensive. He'd hired caterers, a photographer, even a small jazz band. His home was decorated with congratulations banners, and he'd set up a slideshow of Emma's childhood photos on a massive screen in his living room. What he hadn't asked was whether Emma wanted any of this. She'd told us she preferred a simple dinner with family, but Gerard had overruled her, saying she deserved something special. Rebecca and I arrived at 7. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn to countless family gatherings over the years. It still fit, though it was showing its age. Rebecca wore a simple dress she'd bought on sale at the Bay. We'd driven up from our hotel in our rented Ford Fusion our Honda had finally given out the year before, and we'd replaced it with a sensible used Mazda. Gerard greeted us at the door wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than I supposedly earned in a month. His handshake was firm to the point of aggressive. "David, Rebecca, welcome, welcome. Emma's already here. She came with Patricia and me in the Mercedes. We picked her up from her apartment. You should see this place she's renting, David. Tiny studio in Kitsilano. I told her she should let me help her find something better, but she insists on being independent." He said the word like it was a character flaw. Inside, the house was filled with family and Emma's friends. She looked uncomfortable in the center of all the attention, graciously accepting congratulations, while clearly wishing she was anywhere else. When she saw Rebecca and me, her face brightened with genuine relief. "Mom, Dad." She extracted herself from a conversation with Gerard's business partner and came over to hug us. "Thank goodness you're here. Uncle Gerard has been a lot." "It's your night, sweetheart," Rebecca said, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. "We're so proud of you." Gerard clinked his glass, calling for attention. The room quieted as he stepped onto a small raised platform he'd apparently had installed specifically for speeches. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my niece Emma's graduation," he began. "When Emma was born, I remember thinking, this child is going to do great things. And look at her now, a UBC engineering graduate. Though I have to say, I'm a bit disappointed she didn't take me up on my offer to attend McGill. Montreal has such better connections for business." Emma's smile became fixed. I felt Rebecca's hand find mine again. Gerard continued. "Emma has her father's head for numbers and her mother's creativity, which is a powerful combination. Though I'd argue that being an engineer is much more impressive than, no offense, David crunching numbers for small businesses." He laughed, and a few people joined him uncomfortably. "But seriously," Gerard went on, his tone shifting to something more paternal, "I want Emma to know that as she starts her career, she has family who can help her. Not everyone has the advantages that I've been able to provide for Brendan and Madison. Emma's parents have done their best with what they have, but let's be honest, an accountant's salary only goes so far in Vancouver." I felt Rebecca stiffen beside me. Emma's cheeks flushed red. "So here's what I'd like to propose," Gerard said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Emma, I've spoken with our HR department at Hartwell Development, and we'd like to offer you a position. Not in engineering, that's not really our focus, but in project coordination. It's entry-level, $45,000 a year, but it's a foot in the door, better than whatever that engineering firm is paying you, I'm sure. Plus, you'd be working with family." The room went silent. Emma looked stricken. I could feel the rage building in Rebecca beside me, her hand tightening around mine. Gerard, oblivious or uncaring, pressed on. "I know you've already accepted something else, but trust me, Emma, that's not going anywhere. Small firms come and go. Hartwell Development is established, stable. You'd be secure. And who knows, maybe we could find something for your father too. We always need accountants, David. Nothing senior, of course, but steady work. Better than scrambling for clients every month." That was the moment. That was when 28 years of condescension, of belittlement, of watching Gerard treat my family like charity cases finally crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. I'd spent nearly 3 decades hiding my success, protecting my family from the corruption of wealth, building something extraordinary in silence. But silence, I realized, had allowed Gerard to believe his own narrative, had allowed him to think his money gave him the right to demean people I loved. I looked at Emma, at her humiliation, at Rebecca, at her barely contained fury, at Gerard, preening on his platform, genuinely believing he was being generous. I stood up. "Gerard," I said quietly. The room turned to look at me. "That's a very kind offer, but I need to decline on Emma's behalf. She's already accepted a position that aligns with her actual career goals. Engineering, not project coordination." Gerard waved his hand dismissively. "David, I understand you're proud, but this is about Emma's future. She needs to be practical." "I agree," I said. "Practicality is important, which is why I think Emma should stay with the firm that recognized her actual qualifications and offered her a competitive salary in her chosen field." "And what would you know about competitive salaries?" Gerard laughed. "No offense, but you've spent your whole life in a one-room office doing basic bookkeeping." "Actually, Gerard, I've spent the last 28 years building something. You're right that I don't talk about it much. I prefer to let results speak for themselves." Gerard's smile became patronizing. "I'm sure your accounting practice does fine, David. I'm not talking about my accounting practice," I interrupted. "I'm talking about Clearwater Capital Partners." The name hung in the air. I watched Gerard's face, waiting for recognition. It took a moment, but when it came, his expression shifted from patronizing to confused. "The investment firm?" he said slowly. "Yes. What about it?" "I own it." Gerard laughed, but it sounded uncertain. "You work for them?" "No, Gerard. I own it. I founded it in 1996. I'm the sole shareholder." The room had gone completely silent. Rebecca was staring at me, her face unreadable. Emma's eyes were wide. Gerard's laugh became more forced. "That's ridiculous. Clearwater Capital is worth—" He stopped, doing math in his head. "They manage hundreds of millions in assets. $780 million. As of last quarter," I said. "Give or take." Patricia had appeared beside Gerard, touching his arm. "Gerard, didn't Clearwater Capital buy those properties in Richmond that you were bidding on last year?" Gerard's face went pale. "That was you?" "Through the firm, yes. And that tech startup that outbid us for the office complex in Surrey? We backed them in their Series B round. They needed space to expand." Gerard stepped down from his platform, moving closer to me. His voice dropped. "You're telling me you've been sitting on that kind of money while your wife works freelance and your daughter serves coffee?" "I'm telling you that money doesn't define worth," I said. "Emma served coffee because it taught her responsibility and work ethic. Rebecca works freelance because she loves what she does and it gives her creative freedom. We live the way we live because those are our values, not our limitations." "This is insane," Gerard said, his voice rising. "Why would anyone hide that kind of wealth?" "To protect my family from exactly this," I gestured around the room, at the excessive decorations, at the platform he'd used to perform his superiority, from the toxicity of treating relationships like balance sheets, from measuring love in dollars and respect in net worth. Rebecca found her voice. "David, is this true?" I turned to her, my wife of 28 years, and nodded. "Every word. I should have told you. I wanted to tell you so many times. But I was afraid it would change us, change how we saw each other. I loved our life exactly as it was." Emma stood up and walked over to us. "Dad, you've been secretly wealthy this entire time?" "Yes." "And you never told us?" "No." "Why?" I looked at Gerard, then back at my daughter. "Because Uncle Gerard is right about one thing. Money changes people. It changes how they treat you, how they see themselves, how they measure success. Your mother and I wanted you to grow up understanding that your value comes from who you are, not what you have. We wanted you to develop your own sense of accomplishment, your own work ethic, your own values. But my scholarship, I funded the program that gave it to you. You still earned it based on merit. I just made sure the opportunity existed." Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I couldn't read her expression. Then she laughed, a genuine burst of surprised laughter. "That's the most dad thing I've ever heard. You secretly funded my education but made sure I had to work for it anyway." I didn't want to rob you of the pride of earning it yourself. Gerard had recovered somewhat, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is unbelievable. You let everyone think. He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. I let you reveal who you really are, I said. Every dismissive comment, every condescending offer, every time you treated my family like we were less than yours, that was your choice, Gerard. I never asked for your help or your pity. I was trying to be generous. No, you were trying to feel superior. Real generosity doesn't come with humiliation attached. Patricia touched Gerard's arm again. We should probably... But Gerard shook her off. You know what I think? I think you're lying. I think this is some kind of elaborate story to save face. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. Give me your email address. What? Your email address. Give it to me. Gerard recited it, his voice tight. I forwarded him a document from my attorney, Michael Reeves at Patterson, and Associates in Toronto. The email contained a summary of Clearwater Capital Partners' portfolio, including our recent acquisition of a controlling interest in Western Commercial Properties. The company that held the mortgage on the shopping complex Hartwell Development had been developing in Burnaby. Gerard's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his face going from red to white as he scrolled through the document. When he finished, he looked up at me with something like fear in his eyes. You own WCP? As of 6 months ago, yes. You own the company that holds my loan? I own 60% of it, yes. Gerard sat down heavily on the nearest chair. The Burnaby project. The one we're behind on. The one where we requested an extension. I'm aware of the situation. You could, he stopped, the implications sinking in. You could call the loan. I could. The room was watching this exchange like a tennis match. Gerard looked at me with genuine fear now, all his bluster gone. Are you going to? I considered the question. This was the moment I'd imagined in some form for years, the moment when Gerard would finally understand that his money, his success, his superiority complex were built on much shakier ground than he'd realized. I could destroy him with a phone call. I could take everything he'd been using as a weapon against my family and turn it to ash. But that wasn't who I was. That wasn't what my grandfather had taught me when he left me that first portfolio. Wealth is a tool, he'd said. Use it to build, not to destroy. No, I said finally, I'm not going to call your loan. Clearwater doesn't operate that way. Business is business, and personal grievances don't factor into our investment decisions. If Hartwell Development can meet the terms of the extension you requested, Western Commercial Properties will approve it. The same as we would for any client in good faith. Gerard looked stunned. Why? Because using money as a weapon makes you exactly what you've accused others of being, someone who measures worth in dollars. I don't want to beat you, Gerard. I want you to understand that you don't get to determine other people's value based on their bank balance. I turned to address the room, all these people who'd watched Gerard perform his superiority for years. My family lives modestly because we choose to, not because we have to. Emma works hard because we raised her to value effort, not because we couldn't afford to give her everything. Rebecca pursues work she loves because life is too short to do anything else. These aren't compromises. They're choices, and they're good ones. I look back at Gerard. Your children had every advantage money could buy, and Brendan flunked out of 2 universities while Madison measures her worth in designer labels. My daughter graduated with honors and landed a competitive position on her own merit. Money didn't make the difference. Values did. Rebecca stood up and walked over to me. For a long moment, she just looked at me, and I couldn't tell if she was angry or hurt or relieved. Then she said, "We need to talk, all 3 of us." She gestured to include Emma. "I know. Tonight. After this, whatever this is, absolutely." She turned to Gerard. "And you need to apologize to my daughter for trying to derail her actual career with your condescending offer." Gerard opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Emma, I apologize. I thought I was helping, but I see now that I was being presumptuous." Emma nodded, accepting the apology with more grace than he deserved. The party didn't last much longer after that. People made polite excuses and filtered out, probably eager to go home and gossip about what they'd witnessed. Gerard disappeared into his study, and Patricia tried to salvage the evening with strained small talk, but the damage was done. Rebecca, Emma, and I left together and drove back to our hotel in silence. When we got to our room, a modest 2-room suite that suddenly felt absurdly understated, Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me. 28 years, she said. Yes. You never once thought to tell me? I thought about it every day. But you didn't. No. Why? I sat down beside her, choosing my words carefully. When we met, I'd just inherited money from my grandfather. I'd seen what inheritance did to my cousins, how it made them entitled, how it changed their relationships, how people treated them differently when they knew about the money. I wanted to know you loved me for who I was, not what I had. I would have. I know. But I was 26 and afraid. And then months became years, and the money grew, and it became this thing I didn't know how to explain. How do you tell your wife that you've been hiding hundreds of millions of dollars? When would have been the right time? Emma sat down on the other bed, watching us both. For what it's worth, I think I get it. Not the hiding the money part that's weird, Dad, but the why. Uncle Gerard has money, and he's miserable. He uses it like a weapon, and his kids are disasters. We're happy. We might be secretly rich, apparently, but we're happy. Rebecca looked at our daughter. You're handling this remarkably well. Emma shrugged. I'm definitely going to need therapy to process the fact that I served coffee for 3 years, while my dad apparently could have bought the entire coffee chain. But I get why he did it. I learned things working there. I learned how to deal with difficult customers, how to manage my time, how to appreciate what I earned. If I'd known we were rich, would I have bothered? Probably not, Rebecca admitted. She turned back to me. I'm not saying I'm okay with this, David. You kept a massive secret from me for our entire marriage. That's going to take time to process. But I also understand why. And I can see that you did it from a place of love, not manipulation. I'm sorry, I said. I should have told you years ago. Yes, you should have. She took my hand. But we're going to figure this out. Together. No more secrets. No more secrets, I agreed. So what happens now? Emma asked. Do we move to a mansion, buy fancy cars, start wearing designer clothes? No, Rebecca and I said simultaneously. I continued. We keep living our lives the way we have been, because those lives make us happy. We use the money to do good things, support causes we believe in, help people who need it, create opportunities for others. But we don't let it define us. Can I at least get a nicer apartment? Emma asked. My current place has a family of mice living in the walls. I laughed. Yes, we can probably swing that. Over the next few weeks, I gradually brought Rebecca into the full picture of Clearwater Capital Partners. I introduced her to Michael Reeves, my attorney, and to Janet Liu, the managing director who'd been running day-to-day operations. I showed her the portfolio, explained the investments, walked her through how I'd built the firm from my grandfather's initial inheritance into what it was now. She was angry at first, angry that I'd hidden it, angry that I'd made unilateral decisions about our family's financial future, angry that I'd denied her the choice to be part of it. But gradually, as she understood the scope of what I'd built and why, the anger transformed into something else. Not quite forgiveness, but understanding. You've spent 3 decades essentially living a double life, she said one evening, as we sat in our living room in Winnipeg. You went to work every day at that accounting firm, came home, helped with homework, went to Emma's soccer games, lived this completely normal life, while simultaneously managing an investment empire. That must have been exhausting. Sometimes, I admitted. But it was also freeing in a way. At the accounting firm, I was just David the accountant. No one wanted anything from me except competent work. No one treated me differently because of money. I had genuine relationships built on who I was, not what I had. And now? Now I think it's time to be honest. With you, with Emma, with the world, I've been hiding for long enough. What about Gerard? What about him? Are you going to tell the rest of the family? I thought about it. No. Gerard knows, and that's enough. I don't need to humiliate him further, but I'm also not going to pretend anymore. If it comes up, I'll be honest. I'm done performing modesty to make other people comfortable with their assumptions. Rebecca smiled. Good. The fallout from that night in West Vancouver rippled through the family in unexpected ways. Gerard became quieter, less performative. He stopped making dismissive comments about my work, stopped offering unsolicited help, stopped treating us like charity cases. I wasn't sure if he was chastened or just afraid, but either way, Family gatherings became more bearable. Patricia reached out to Rebecca separately, apologizing for all the time she'd participated in or enabled Gerard's condescension. They started having coffee together when we visited Vancouver, building a relationship independent of their husband's complicated dynamic. Brendan and Madison, Gerard's children, both eventually reached out to Emma to apologize for the ways they'd looked down on our family over the years. Madison, in particular, seemed to be going through a transformation, questioning the values she'd been raised with and trying to build something authentic in her life. But the most significant change was in how Rebecca, Emma, and I related to each other. The secret that had been a wall between us became instead a foundation for deeper honesty. We talked about money, not just how to use it, but what it meant, what it represented, what values we wanted it to reflect. Emma decided to stay at her engineering firm and work her way up on her own merit, but she did move to a nicer apartment, one without mice. She also started volunteering with a program that helped underprivileged youth access STEM education, using some of the money I'd set aside for her to fund scholarships and mentorship programs. Rebecca expanded her design business, taking on projects she was passionate about, rather than just projects that paid well. She also started teaching design courses at a local community center, sharing her skills with people who couldn't afford traditional art school. As for me, I kept my position at the accounting firm for another year before finally stepping back to focus more fully on Clearwater Capital Partners. Not because I needed the money, but because I'd realized that my grandfather's wisdom about wealth went deeper than I'd initially understood. Money isn't just a tool for buying freedom or opportunity. It's a responsibility. And I'd been shirking that responsibility by hiding, by treating wealth like something shameful that needed to be concealed rather than something powerful that needed to be wielded wisely. So I stepped into the light. I started using Clearwater Capital Partners more deliberately, investing in companies that aligned with our values: sustainable energy, affordable housing, educational technology, healthcare innovation. We funded scholarships and small business grants. We bought struggling community centers and renovated them rather than tearing them down for development. And I did all of it openly, as David Morrison, not as some anonymous numbered company. I gave interviews about ethical investing. I spoke at business schools about building wealth without sacrificing values. I became visible, deliberate, purposeful. Some people called me a hypocrite. How can you claim to value modesty while managing nearly $1 billion in assets? But I'd learned that modesty and wealth aren't mutually exclusive. You can have money without letting it define you. You can be wealthy without being materialistic. You can use power without wielding it as a weapon. Gerard eventually called me, about 8 months after that night in West Vancouver. His voice was different, humbler, more genuine. "I wanted to tell you that Hartwell Development met all the terms of our extension," he said. "We're back on track with the Burnaby project. I'm glad to hear it, and I wanted to thank you for not destroying me when you could have, for still treating our business relationship professionally despite everything. Business should be separate from personal grievances," I said. I also wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just because Patricia made me. I've spent 30 years measuring my worth by my bank balance and treating everyone else the same way. I looked down on you because I thought I was more successful. But success isn't just about money, is it? No, it's not. Your daughter is doing incredible things in her career. My son is barely holding down his position at my company. Your marriage is strong, mine. Patricia and I are in counseling. You built something real while I built something shiny. I'm trying to learn from that. I didn't know what to say to that. Gerard had never been this vulnerable, this honest. "It's never too late to change," I said finally. "I hope that's true." We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I don't know if Gerard truly changed after that conversation, but at least he was trying. And sometimes, trying is enough. The most profound conversation happened about a year after the revelation, on Emma's 30th birthday. We were having dinner, just the three of us, at a modest restaurant in Winnipeg that made excellent pierogies. Emma raised her glass for a toast. "To my parents," she said, "who taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in integrity, in values, in the quality of your relationships, and the impact you have on the world. Dad, you hid millions of dollars from us for 30 years, which is objectively insane." We all laughed. "But you did it because you wanted us to develop our own sense of worth, our own work ethic, our own values." And we did. So, thank you for being crazy enough to care more about our character than our comfort, Rebecca added, and for trusting us enough to finally tell us the truth, even when it was hard. I looked at these two remarkable women, my wife who'd stood by me through 30 years of secrets and revelations, my daughter who'd grown into exactly the kind of person we'd hoped she'd become, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. I'm the lucky one, I said. You're both extraordinary, and that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with who you are. We clinked glasses, three people who'd learned that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or investments. It's the values you pass down, the integrity you model, the love you share without condition or transaction. My grandfather used to say that wealth is a tool, not a goal. But he taught me something even more important. The real measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with it. Not how much they accumulate, but how wisely they use it. Not how they display their success, but how they define it. Gerard spent 30 years using his money to prove his superiority, and it left him with a fragile ego and damaged relationships. I spent 30 years hiding my money to protect my family's values, and it gave us something Gerard's displays of wealth never could: genuine connection, authentic relationships, and the deep satisfaction of knowing we'd built something real. In the end, Gerard and I both had wealth, but only one of us had richness. Money can buy many things: houses, cars, experiences, opportunities. But it cannot buy the one thing that matters most: the knowledge that the people in your life love you for who you are, not what you have, that your accomplishments are truly yours, that your relationships are built on genuine respect and shared values rather than financial transactions and power dynamics. That's the lesson I hope Emma carries forward. That's the wisdom I wish I'd fully understood when I was 26 and terrified that wealth would corrupt the pure connection I'd found with Rebecca. I would have saved us all a lot of confusion if I'd learned earlier that it's not money that corrupts, it's the values you attach to it, the weight you give it, the power you let it have over your identity and relationships. Use wealth wisely. Share it generously, but never let it define your worth or determine how you treat others. Because in the end, when you're sitting around a table with the people you love, sharing pierogies and laughter and genuine connection, that's when you realize what real wealth looks like. And it has nothing to do with the number in your bank account.